To better understand objects and classes, let's replace the words with a pre-existing concept, which would be a recipe. We all know what a recipe is, right? I mean, I hope your parents gave you a recipe book when you went to uni. It's basically that little cookbook. And we all know that a recipe is basically like a single page, and with this single page, we're able to create a dish. Now, the kind of dish, we can make any dish we want. We can make a pizza, pasta, chicken, meat. It's endless. The possibilities are endless. For this example, let's say we're making an apple pie dish. And what is a successful recipe? Well, every recipe would have two parts. They would have the first part, which would be a list of ingredients. So for our apple pie, we would say we want flour, apple, or any other ingredients. And the second part would be a list of instructions and how we would use these ingredients so that we can create our dish. So this case would be our instant variables and our methods. And once we have completed our recipe, we're now able to create our dish. So for this case, we're gonna make our apple pie thanks to our apple pie recipe. But here's the best part. I'm not limited to just making one apple pie. I can make another apple pie because I have my apple pie recipe. So I can make another one, and on top of two, let's get 3 apple pies. So now I just made 3 individual apple pies thanks to my one apple pie recipe. And thanks to that, that is objects and classes. So the recipe is the class, a set of instructions and variables, and the dishes are the objects. But here's something what's even cooler when it comes to Java's objects and classes, is that if I want to update my recipe, let's say if saying an apple pie, make a peach pie, I can then update the recipe to change the ingredients. So instead of saying I want apples, I want some peaches, and I can change maybe some flour would be brown flour. I can put brown sugar. I can put a little list of different ingredients. All the dishes that were made from the apple pie recipe will now be updated with the new ingredients from the peach pie recipe because they were originally made from the apple pie recipe. So I don't have to make a bunch of new objects or dishes. You see how it is? This is the power of classes and objects, the ability to reuse dishes. Now let's apply that same concept with making another entity. Let's say we want to make a class for Pokemon. Yes, the Pokemon, the multi-billion-dollar corporation that sells a yellow Mickey Mouse. And if I told you to make a class for Pokemon, we already know that it's basically saying I want to make a Pokemon recipe. And we also know a recipe is just ingredients and instructions. That's all it is. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the bare essential of ingredients we need to be considered a Pokemon recipe? Well, in this case, it would be definitely the name. We need the name of the Pokemon. Another ingredient we must have is the type. That's important for a Pokemon. Another ingredient we can put is level. Now, of course, we can keep adding, but these are just the bare essentials I'm putting for this example. Now, we can also put the instructions or the behaviors we want our Pokemon to do. Now, there's a lot of different behaviors we can do, but for this case, we're gonna make it simple. We'll just say, okay, I'll do the first instruction would be just to laugh, just a simple like hello. And then another example could be to dance. I like that. I like my Pokemon to dance. And of course, we can add more of these instructions, but this is just for the example. Now we've completed our recipe. We can now create some Pokemon. In this case, we can make a Bulbasaur, we can create a Charmander, and then we can also create a Squirtle, which is pretty cool. And here's the best thing. We're not limited to each individual Pokemon. We can create duplicates. We can create 2 Bulbasaurs, 3 Bulbasaurs, we can create 2 Charmanders, or maybe even 3 Charmanders. We can create 2 Squirtles and 3 Squirtles. And we can make as many Pokemon as we want because we already have the recipe. And the best thing is, each individual Pokemon is its own individual self with its own ingredients and instructions. Now let's do another example, but by only making a Bulbasaur recipe. So let's apply the same theory we already applied the other 2 examples. We're making a recipe for Bulbasaur, so we need ingredients. The first ingredient we would put is the level. We would store 1. Another ingredient we could put is the name, which would be Bulbasaur. Now, of course, these are just the first 2 examples. We can keep adding more ingredients. Another ingredient we could put is the type, which would be a grass type. Now, of course, we can keep going with more ingredients for this Bulbasaur recipe, but we're just doing the first 3 as an example. After that's done, we can create the instructions, which are just the methods of the class. The first method I could think of would be to create a toSpeak method, which would allow me to call the Pokemon and to say its name. This would allow me to select the ingredient and add on to the ingredient, let's say an expression. So say it screams out its name. Another instruction I can put is to say to dance, because I love when my Pokemon to dance, because I'm boring that way. So let's add on the same example. I would just create my method. I would add a little string. I would get my ingredient from my recipe and add on to it by saying, oh, the name plus is dancing. Once I have that all completed, I can go to my main method and then create my dishes, which are the Pokemon, by using the recipe from the Bulbasaur class. So in this example, I'm creating the Bulbasaur dish and naming it Jerry. And I'm going to use the Bulbasaur recipe to create the dish. But that's not stopping me from making another Bulbasaur named Tom. So now I have two Bulbasaurs, both using the Bulbasaur recipe. And the best thing is, both Bulbasaurs have their own access to the instructions and ingredients. Congratulations, you officially have now understood methods and classes and objects and instant variables. I hope